I signed my first contract to do a biography in 1981, and Martin Sherwin signed about the same time to do Oppenheimer in 1980. And 20 years later, he came to me and said, I know you're in between books now. Would you like to join me on my Oppenheimer project? And he had spent 20 years researching. Wow. But I actually was a little hesitant to join him initially, because I knew that writing a book is difficult, and co-authorship can be sometimes even more difficult.
Yeah.
But he persuaded me, and we joined, and it turned into a terrific, collaboration. He had done such fantastic research that there was very little for me to do except sit down and start writing. And once I started to write, he began writing as well, and we went back and forth. But still, it was a complicated story. He had gathered 50,000 pages of archival documents. He'd interviewed 150 people. And still, Oppenheimer was always a mystery, always rather elusive.
Because you want to put the real fact in the story, right? So there will always be some space for people to think, because, you never know. There's just so much written, so much you can find, right? There's always a space for people to...
Yeah, you don't want to pretend that you know the whole life. No one can do that. But Oppenheimer is complicated because he is not only a theoretical quantum physicist, but he was also a polymath. He was interested in poetry. He wrote poetry himself. He was interested in novels and literature, and he acquired an interest, though he was of Jewish background. He was fascinated by the Hindu scriptures, so he learned Sanskrit so that he could read the Gita in the original. Complicated man. The film is, I think brilliant and evocative. It explains Oppenheimer's intense personality as played by Cillian Murphy. He captures his wiry personality, his energy, his voice, the way he talks. He was a privileged New York City boy from a wealthy family, but he enjoyed horseback riding and spending days going off on a long horseback ride with just a bottle of whiskey and a can of peanut butter, and camping out and sleeping under the stars. He loved this Spartan. He's a complicated man in that way. Oddly, a New York City boy who falls in love with New Mexico. He had bought a ranch out in New Mexico in the 1930s. And spent every summer at this ranch up at 9,000 feet, 130 acres, in this wooden cabin with no running water, no electricity. He would spend the whole summer there. And so he really loved New Mexico. Early 1930s, he turned to his younger brother, Frank, to whom he was very close. He said, I would find happiness in life if I could somehow find a way to combine my love of physics with my love of New Mexico. Well, he did find a way to combine his passions, because he told General Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, when he recruited him to become the scientific director, he said, I have the ideal place where you should build this weapon. It's called Los Alamos, and it just happens to be a few miles down the road from his beloved ranch in New Mexico. So he was able to combine his love of physics with his love of New Mexico. I was very pleasantly surprised by the screenplay and the movie. It's an enormous achievement, and I wouldn't be surprised if Nolan wins several Academy Awards for this. most of the screenplay comes right out of the book. There are whole lines and paragraphs of dialogue that I can recognize from the book. It's his story. It's, you know, just as this is my story about Oppenheimer, Nolan's movie is his story about Oppenheimer as depicted in film. And it's a very different artistic medium.
Yeah.
And it's much more powerful on one level because it's so visual, and yet it's very limited because it can't have all these words and it can't have the footnotes.
Yeah.
Well, in the book you get much more of his childhood and his development and his struggles with adolescence, his awkwardness socially.
Yeah.
But then Oppenheimer, you know, overcomes this emotional crisis and discovers quantum physics, which he falls in love with. And he's good at it. It's, you know, he can hear the music of quantum and he can think theoretically. He wasn't actually particularly good at mathematics, but he could see the implications of Einstein's relativity theory, and he embraced Niels Bohr's quantum theories to explain the physical world. And of course, this is why he's eventually chosen to become scientific director of the Los Alamos project. And he's good at that precisely because he's not just a physicist. He's this well-rounded individual who has multiple interests, and he's a humanist, and he's interested in philosophy and the human condition. And you know, by 1942 he was also a political man. He was a man of the left in Berkeley, and he gave money to causes supported by the Communist Party, like trying to desegregate a segregated public swimming pool in Berkeley. His first love, Jean Tatlock, had nagged him to become more politically aware in the midst of the Depression, and so he became close to the Communist Party. But then this is a mystery too about just how close to the Communist Party he was. Was he a member, or was he just pink and not red? And Marty and I concluded, based on the FBI documents and other sources, that he was never red. He never joined the party formally, but he was close. You know, Oppenheimer's younger brother Frank, was a member of the party, and the woman he eventually married, Kitty, had also been a Communist Party member. Anyway, these activities, of course, were going to come back to haunt him later, because after he became a celebrated scientist, he began to criticize the very notion of relying on these weapons of mass destruction for security.
So after you finish writing this book, do you have a somewhat clear picture of him?
Well, yes and no. You know, there's still mysteries about him. I'm the biographer will be the first to admit that, you know, you can never know everything about another human being. And there's still mysteries about his relationships. His marriage is very complicated, but he was clearly always attracted to women who were strong personalities and highly educated, and he maintained a relationship with his first love, Jean Tatlock, whom he had proposed to, and she had turned him down repeatedly. So he moved on. He met Kitty and fell in love with Kitty, but Jean kept coming into his life, and we really don't know what happened to Jean Tatlock. She may have committed suicide in 1944 by drowning herself in a bathtub. In the book, we explore, well, was she murdered? Because the security apparatus around Oppenheimer had put him under surveillance. They knew that he was seeing her.
Do you think those kind of information, if actually it exists, will one day be released, or?
I think this is a mystery that will always remain a mystery. She probably committed suicide, in my opinion, but it's odd. The evidence is kind of been buried. You know, he was painfully aware of the burden of being the father of the atomic bomb. He didn't like the notion. And yet he also, oddly enough, you know, he enjoyed his celebrity status as a scientist. And one of the mysteries we deal with in the book, and I think is explored a little bit in Nolan's film, is why did he subject himself to this terrible trial? He could go to the hearing and he could explain in a rational way his politics and his political history and reassure everyone, and he would triumph. And the answer, we think, is in part that he sort of thought initially that his celebrity status would protect him. He was very politically naive. You know, this was a devastating result. He became a wounded public intellectual who could never really speak out again. But he was, after the 54 hearing, you know, he retreated from the world. He actually literally retreated to the Caribbean, to an island in the Virgin Islands in St. John, where he spent the rest of his life, usually 3 to 4 months a year, sailing and walking on the beach and being a hermit. He retreated from the world. It was extraordinary. After being such a public, famous scientist, he became a non-entity. And there was, you know, we do know when he was still alive in the 60s, there was a play written about him called In the Matter of J. Robert Oppenheimer, based on the transcripts of the 1954 hearing. And it's a pretty decent play and dramatic and based on those transcripts, so fairly accurate. Oppenheimer hated it.
Because it's not the way he wanted to be seen or to be remembered.
Right, and he actually threatened to sue the playwright. He never did.
It's kind of like maybe the bottom, the lowest point of his life, and someone made it into a show and then to brought it up. And then maybe it's wounded him again.
Right. So I'm afraid if he were still with us today, he probably would not approve of this book.